What would you do if the woman you loved not only betrayed you, but framed you for murder? This is the story of Ethan Callahan, a man who had everything: success, wealth, respect, until one night shattered it all. His wife's betrayal was only the beginning. Soon he found himself at the center of a double homicide investigation with an old enemy in the police determined to see him fall. But Ethan wasn't a man who broke easily. And as the case unfolded, he uncovered a plot so corrupt, it threatened to destroy everyone involved. Stay until the end because the twist will turn every assumption upside down. You're watching Cheating Stories 7. If stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's step into the world of Betrayed by My Wife, Framed for Murder. But I turned the tables. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting a pale, cold glow over the cramped interrogation room. The air was thick with the sterile bite of disinfectant, underscored by a faint metallic tang that seemed to cling to every surface, the kind of scent that never left police stations. At the center stood a battered metal table, its edges dented and scratched, flanked by two mismatched chairs that had seen better days. Ethan Callahan sat in one of them, posture deceptively relaxed, yet his eyes were alert, scanning, cataloging every detail like a chess master studying the board before the first move. Beside him, Graham Foster adjusted his tie with the ease of a man who had walked into countless rooms like this, and walked just as many clients back out again. Ethan was not just another client to Graham. They had met a decade earlier. Long before the tech company Ethan had built turned him into a multi-millionaire. Back then, Graham had guided him through a tangled business dispute and earned a loyalty that had never wavered. Today, that loyalty was about to be tested in a way neither man had foreseen. The door creaked open. Detective Harris Boone entered first, tall, weathered, his every movement deliberate. He carried the quiet authority of a man who relied on his words, not his temper, to do the heavy lifting. A moment later came Cole Whitman, his younger partner, wearing a smirk that seemed to enter the room before he did. The moment Ethan saw him, recognition flashed in his eyes: high school football, the locker room, a fight that ended with Whitman humiliated and vowing revenge. Some grudges aged poorly. This one had aged into pure poison. Well, Whitman drawled, leaning back in his chair before fully sitting. Look who's wandered into my world again. Graham's brow lifted slightly, but Ethan only offered a faint smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. Your world? Last I checked, Cole, this is still Riverton, not the set of whatever cop drama you think you're starring in. Boone cleared his throat, already weary of the testosterone in the air. Mr. Callahan, we just want to ask a few questions about the events of last Tuesday. Ethan leaned forward, voice calm but firm. Then let's get something straight. The entire interview is recorded from start to finish. No missing footage, no edits. And the moment either of you lies to me, I walk out. No exceptions. Whitman gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You think you're running this show? Ethan's gaze hardened. No, I know I am. Boone hesitated, then gave a slow nod toward the corner camera. Fine, it's recording. Good. Ethan settled back in his chair, but his mind was already moving, gears turning fast. He knew exactly what this was, not just a murder investigation, but a staged performance. His name had been tied to the deaths of Madison and Derek because someone wanted more than justice. Someone wanted him destroyed. And if his instincts were right, one of those people was sitting across the table right now. Boone began with standard questions, where Ethan had been, what he had been doing, and Ethan answered with precise clarity, never giving more than necessary. Graham's pen tapped a steady rhythm on the table, a quiet metronome of control. Then Boone leaned forward and said, We found your DNA on Derek Collins' clothes. Ethan's smile faded. He glanced at the clock on the wall, then at Graham. We're done here, he said, rising from his chair. That's your first lie. Whitman's smirk faltered as Ethan and Graham walked out, the heavy metal door swinging shut behind them. The game had begun, and Ethan had no intention of playing by their rules. 2 nights earlier, Riverton had been swallowed whole by a relentless rainstorm, the kind that blurred neon signs into streaks of color and turned the city's streets into ribbons of black glass. At precisely 10:43 p.m., a neighbor in Derek Collins' upscale apartment building dialed 911, reporting 2 sharp cracks that didn't sound like thunder. By the time patrol units arrived, the scene was already frozen in its final, brutal tableau. Derek lay sprawled across his leather couch, 2 neat bullet wounds to the head. Madison Callahan was on the floor nearby, one arm twisted unnaturally beneath her body, her eyes staring into nothing. A half-empty glass of red wine teetered on the edge of the coffee table, its dark contents spilling slowly into the fibers of an expensive rug. The news spread faster than the rain could wash it away. By morning, Ethan Callahan's name dominated every headline. Tech millionaire's wife and lover found dead. Reporters swarmed outside his gated home, their shouts competing with the machine gun clatter of camera shutters. The narrative wrote itself: a wealthy husband, a cheating wife, a lover who had publicly humiliated him, and now a double homicide. Inside the storm of speculation, Ethan remained unnervingly calm. In private, he told Graham what he hadn't told the press. His marriage had been dead for years, surviving only in public appearances and legal paperwork. Madison had drifted into a world of designer handbags, impulsive weekend trips with friends, and quiet bank transfers that never appeared on their joint statements. She was an expert at playing the perfect wife in public and dismantling him in private. Derek Collins was no innocent bystander in her betrayals. Years ago, at a charity gala, he had provoked Ethan in front of mutual acquaintances. The confrontation spilled into the parking lot, ending with Derek nursing a split lip and Ethan spending the night in a holding cell for disturbing the peace. From then on, Derek seemed to make a sport of baiting him, sly remarks at social events, rumors whispered just loudly enough to travel. Madison's affair with Derek was gasoline poured onto an already burning fire. And now, with both of them dead, the picture was all too clear for the court of public opinion. Ethan Callahan, the wronged husband who had finally snapped. What the public didn't know was that Ethan had been preparing to file for divorce in less than 2 weeks. He had far more to lose than to gain from an act of violence. But nuance wasn't part of the headlines. In the eyes of the city, guilt was simply a story that made sense, and Ethan was already the villain. Ethan hadn't seen Cole Whitman in nearly 12 years, yet the moment the man stepped into the interrogation room that morning, the past slammed into him like a punch to the ribs. High school football had been their shared battlefield. Ethan, the rising star quarterback with an instinctive feel for the game, and Cole, the defensive linebacker with more muscle than discipline. On paper, they were meant to complement each other. In reality, they were oil and fire. The grudge that bound them was forged one cold autumn evening after a playoff game. A miscommunication on the field, one Ethan would swear until his last breath was deliberate, had cost their team the championship. In the locker room afterward, tempers boiled over. Cole, still in full pads, had shoved Ethan into a row of lockers, spitting words like soft and overrated. Ethan, never the type to back down, landed a punch that split Cole's eyebrow and dropped him hard onto the tile floor. Coaches pulled them apart, but the damage was done. Both were suspended for the remainder of the season. Cole never forgave him. Seeing Cole's name on the case file now felt less like coincidence and more like a carefully arranged play. Ethan couldn't shake the suspicion that someone maybe inside the department, maybe higher up, had ensured Cole would be lead detective. Revenge, after all, came in many forms, and for Cole, this case was an opportunity served on a silver platter. Detective Harris Boone, Cole's partner, was different. Boone carried himself with quiet professionalism, his questions deliberate, his tone steady. But Ethan noticed the subtle tells, the way Boone deferred to Cole, the sidelong glances as if seeking silent approval before pressing a point. Boone might have preferred a fair investigation, but the gravitational pull of his partner's bias was strong. Ethan understood now that this wasn't just about clearing his name. It was a war fought on two fronts, one in the courtroom, bound by rules and evidence, and one in the shadows, driven by grudges and personal vendettas. Cole wasn't merely doing his job. He was settling an old score, and he would not stop until Ethan was buried under the weight of suspicion. Leaning back in his chair, Ethan studied Cole the way a chess player studies an opponent before the opening move. The man across from him was older now, his jawline softer, but the smirk was exactly the same as it had been in that locker room all those years ago. And just like then, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was going to get ugly, and only one of them would walk away with the win. The old ceiling vent hummed softly above, the sound mingling with the faint metallic tang of the interrogation room. Ethan sat with his hands folded neatly on the cold metal table. Across from him, Cole Whitman lounged with that same smug half-smile Ethan had known since high school, eyes narrowed in calculated amusement. Detective Harris Boone took the seat to Cole's right, placing a tidy stack of papers before him as if to announce that they were ready and in control. Ethan spoke first, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Before we start, there are conditions." Boone's brow lifted slightly. "Conditions?" "Yes." Ethan's gaze was steady, his tone deliberate. "Number one, the entire session is recorded from start to finish. No edits, no missing footage. Number two, all questions are to be asked professionally without baiting or personal insults. Number three, the moment I detect a lie from either of you, I walk. End of interview." Cole leaned back in his chair, letting out a dismissive snort. "You think you're in a position to negotiate?" Ethan's eyes locked on him. "I'm not negotiating, Cole. I'm telling you how this will work if you want me to answer anything at all." Boone glanced between them, the air tight with unspoken challenge. After a beat, he nodded. "Fine, we'll play it your way." The first few questions were procedural, where Ethan had been 2 nights ago when he last saw Madison. Whether he owned a firearm. Ethan answered with controlled precision, offering enough detail to sound cooperative but withholding anything that could be twisted against him. At one point, he let slip a hint about having an alibi, phrased casually, as if it were an afterthought. Then Boone slid a photograph across the table. Derek Collins lay in the frame, blurred crime scene behind him. "We found your DNA on his clothing. Care to explain?" The room seemed to constrict. Graham Foster, silent until now, gave Ethan the faintest nod. Ethan studied the photo for a moment before raising his gaze to Boone's eyes. "That," he said slowly, "is your first lie." Pushing the photo back, Ethan rose from his chair, smoothing the front of his jacket. "We're done here." "Sit down, Callahan," Cole barked, but Ethan was already moving toward the door. Graham stood as well, collecting his briefcase with the same unhurried precision he'd had when they walked in. At the doorway, Ethan paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "If you want to talk again, bring the truth with you. Otherwise, stop wasting my time." The metal door shut with a heavy, final click, leaving Boone staring down at the table and Cole glaring after them. Ethan had given them nothing except a clear message. This was a game, and he intended to win it on his own terms. The rain had eased into a fine mist by the time Ethan and Graham stepped out of the precinct. Neither spoke until they were several blocks away, sitting inside Graham's dark sedan. Outside, the city lights fractured into shifting patterns across the windshield, blurred by droplets. Ethan broke the silence first. "They think they've got me cornered," he murmured almost to himself. "Let them." Graham glanced sideways. "That's not how a man facing a double homicide charge usually talks." "That's because I'm not planning to face it," Ethan replied, pulling his phone from his pocket. With a few taps, he opened a grainy video thumbnail, a gymnasium with rows of folding chairs, and Ethan himself standing on a polished basketball court. He turned the screen toward Graham. "This," he said, "is my parachute." The footage had been recorded just 2 days before the murders, at a youth basketball clinic in Lakewood, 93 miles from Riverton. It was an event months in the making, sponsored by Ethan's charitable foundation, attended by over 50 kids from underprivileged neighborhoods. Every drill, every demonstration, every laugh shared with the children had been captured by a man whose day job was as a police videographer for Lakewood PD. "I hired him for the clinic," Ethan explained. "Partly for promotional material, partly so the parents could have a record. But he's meticulous, official timestamps, chain of custody, everything by the book. No one can claim it's fake." Graham leaned back, absorbing the implications. "How long were you there?" "From 11 in the morning until almost 4:30. Even my lunch break was in Lakewood. The medical examiner's report puts the time of death between noon and 3. A razor-thin smile touched Ethan's lips. "Do the math." He went on to detail his safeguards, multiple copies of the footage. One locked in a home safe, another at his office, 2 more in encrypted cloud storage, and a final copy on Graham's secure server. "If anyone tries to tamper with it, I'll know, and when I play the full recording in court, it won't just clear me, it'll humiliate them." Graham frowned. "So why not hand it over now and shut this down?" "Because timing," Ethan said simply. "You don't throw your trump card on the first hand. Let them build their case. Let them get confident. The higher they climb, the harder they fall when I pull this out." The car slowed at a red light, the glow bleeding into the interior. Graham studied Ethan's reflection in the glass, calm, almost too calm. "You've thought this through." Ethan slid the phone back into his pocket. "Every second of it, and when the time comes, they'll realize they never had me, not for a single moment." At precisely 6:32 a.m., Ethan's morning workout was interrupted by the sharp, insistent pounding on his front door, followed by a familiar, booming voice. "Riverton Police, open up, Mr. Callahan, we have a warrant." Ethan was midway through a set of pull-ups, sweat gleaming along his forearms. He let the repetition finish, grabbed a towel, and draped it casually around his neck before answering the door. The moment it swung open, the steps outside were crowded with Navy uniforms. At the center stood Cole Whitman, warrant in hand, wearing a smile that was just a shade too satisfied. "Early start, Cole," Ethan said evenly. "Come in, make yourselves at home." The officers fanned out immediately, their boots thudding against the hardwood as they split into groups, kitchen, study, upstairs hallway. Boone entered last, giving Ethan a brief nod before following his partner deeper into the house. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching them move like a pack of trained hounds unleashed. "I'll be out of your way," Ethan announced. "Morning ride, 45 miles if the weather holds." He changed into cycling gear, clipped on his helmet, and was gone before Cole could form a reply. When Ethan returned just over an hour later, the air inside his home felt disturbed. Not in the obvious, chaotic way, but in the subtle shifts that only the owner would notice. A chair angled slightly wrong, desk drawers closed but not quite flush, the faint scent of latex gloves lingering in the hallway. In the foyer, Cole was waiting, a clear evidence bag dangling from his gloved hand. Inside it, a matte black, 380 pistol. "Care to explain this?" Cole asked, mock innocence dripping from his tone. Ethan's gaze rested on the weapon for exactly 2 seconds before meeting Cole's eyes. "That's not mine." "Of course not," Cole replied with a smirk, passing the bag to another officer. "Bag it and log it." To the untrained eye, the exchange might have looked routine, but Ethan knew better. He had never owned a gun in his life, and more importantly, he knew exactly how that pistol had found its way into his house because his walls were never truly empty. Tucked behind crown moldings, hidden in bookshelf panels, and discreetly nestled in the corners of picture frames, tiny high-resolution cameras recorded everything, every single room. Once the last officer filed out, Ethan locked the door, walked into his study, and brought up the security feed from that morning. It didn't take long to find the moment he was looking for: Cole Whitman, alone in the master bedroom, glancing over his shoulder before reaching under his tweed jacket. Out came the 380, catching a faint glint in the soft morning light. He knelt at Ethan's closet, slid the pistol onto the top shelf, and smoothed the sleeve of a hanging coat as though sealing the crime into place. A slow, cold smile crept over Ethan's face. He hit save on the clip, duplicating it to 3 separate drives and an encrypted cloud folder. Cole thought he was laying a trap. Instead, he had just handed Ethan the sharpest weapon in his arsenal. The blinds in Ethan's study were drawn tight, filtering the late morning sun into a muted amber haze. On the desk, a wide monitor displayed a frozen frame from the security feed, Cole Whitman mid-motion, arm halfway into his jacket like a magician about to reveal a trick. Graham Foster stood beside Ethan, a cup of coffee in one hand, glasses sliding low on his nose as he leaned in. "All right," he said. "Show me." Ethan tapped the keyboard. The footage rolled forward. Cole pulled a matte black, 380 pistol from under his jacket, the metal catching a thin shard of light. He set it on the closet shelf, then, as if rehearsed, stepped into the bathroom, retrieved a green toothbrush from a travel kit, and brushed the grip and trigger guard in slow, deliberate strokes. "Jesus," Graham muttered. "He's not even subtle." "It gets better," Ethan said. The video continued. Cole returned the toothbrush, then headed for the laundry basket. He sifted through folded shirts, selected a red and white button-down, and pressed its fabric against the pistol's grip, transferring trace DNA with practiced precision. He slid the gun into the closet's top drawer, smoothed the sleeve of a hanging coat, and left without a glance back. When the clip ended, Graham set his coffee down hard enough for the mug to thud. "This isn't just exculpatory, Ethan. This is a grenade. You drop this in court. The whole case blows apart." Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, eyes still on the frozen image of Cole. "Exactly why I'm not dropping it yet." Graham frowned. "You're telling me you want to wait?" "Think about it," Ethan said. "Right now, they believe they've planted the perfect evidence. Let them keep believing. The more they build their case around this gun, the deeper they bury themselves. When I reveal this, it won't just clear me, it'll turn the jury against them." A slow, knowing smile spread across Graham's face. "You're playing for maximum damage." "Cole wanted to frame me," Ethan replied, saving multiple encrypted copies of the footage. "Fine, I'll frame him right back. The difference is I'll do it in front of a packed courtroom and every camera in the state." The final file name appeared on screen, simple and ominous: insurance. Late in the afternoon, Graham's phone buzzed with a message from a trusted contact inside the Riverton PD. The text was brief but surgical. "They're planning to arrest Ethan at the Foundation HQ tomorrow morning. Media will be there." Ethan read it over Graham's shoulder, a slow, knowing smile forming. "They want the perp walk. Cameras, handcuffs, the full humiliation." "That's the plan," Graham said. "Public opinion's already leaning against you. This will cement it." Ethan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Then we ruin their little show." The next morning, instead of walking into a trap at the glass-walled Callahan Foundation offices, Ethan and Graham walked calmly through the front doors of the Riverton Police Department. Boone, sitting behind the reception desk, looked up in visible surprise. Cole Whitman appeared moments later, jaw tightening when he saw them. "You're early," Cole said flatly. "Punctuality is a virtue," Ethan replied, handing over his ID. "Let's get this over with." Without the spectacle of flashing cameras and public outrage, the booking process felt anticlimactic. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal property logged. Everything moved with the efficiency of an assembly line. Still, Cole lingered nearby, watching, no doubt seething over his stolen moment of glory. That night, Ethan lay on a thin mattress in a holding cell that smelled faintly of bleach and cold concrete. The flicker of a fluorescent bulb cast long shadows across the walls. From the cell opposite, another detainee snored with chainsaw rhythm. Ethan ignored it, letting his mind run over the next steps in the plan. By morning, Graham had secured his release on an eye-watering $2 million cash bail. The sum was absurd, but Ethan paid it without a blink, sliding the receipt into his jacket pocket like a quiet declaration of war. Outside the precinct, a small knot of reporters waited, cameras at the ready. Ethan didn't waste the opportunity. Standing at the top of the steps, he spoke clearly, praising the integrity of most officers in the Riverton PD while condemning the few bad actors who tarnished the badge, pointedly naming Detective Cole Whitman. He accused the district attorney's office of chasing headlines instead of truth, warning that the obsession with optics over justice would cost them. The sound bites spread like wildfire, picked up by local stations and amplified online. By evening, clips of Ethan's statement were playing on news loops, dissected by radio hosts and argued over in comment threads. His deliberate praise for the majority of the force was strategic, a wedge driven neatly between Cole's allies and those who might otherwise back him. This was no longer just about surviving the charges. It was about shifting the battlefield, forcing his enemies to fight on ground he chose. And as Ethan stood there in the cool morning air, cameras flashing, he knew he'd just stolen back control of the narrative. By the end of his first full day out on bail, Ethan had already secured appearances on 2 local morning shows, a drive-time radio interview, and a segment on Riverton's most-watched evening news program. He didn't walk into those studios as a man on the defensive. He walked in like a prize fighter stepping into the ring. On television, he spoke with measured precision, never raising his voice, never sounding desperate. The district attorney's office is chasing headlines, not justice, he told one anchor. They're gambling with taxpayer money to cover their own incompetence. When asked directly about Detective Cole Whitman, Ethan didn't hesitate. Cole has had a personal vendetta against me for over a decade, and now he's abusing his badge to settle it. That's not law enforcement. That's corruption. Clips of those statements hit social media within minutes, sparking heated comment threads and call-in debates. Supporters praised his courage. Detractors called him arrogant. Either way, Ethan was driving the conversation. He wasn't the silent defendant hiding behind counsel. He was the man shaping the story in plain sight. Radio gave him an even looser platform. On Riverton AM 630, speaking to a working-class audience, he shared stories of his foundation's work with at-risk youth. "I've spent the last 5 years giving back to this city," he said. "And now, the very people sworn to uphold the law are trying to destroy me." The station's phone lines lit up before the segment even ended. By the 3rd day, the pressure was undeniable. The district attorney's office released a carefully worded statement. All actions taken in this case are based on credible evidence and proper procedure. It read like a form letter and did nothing to slow the questions. Behind closed doors, senior staff at the DA's office debated their next move. That's when a new name entered the equation, Natalie Pierce. Young, ambitious, and recently transferred from a larger jurisdiction, she had a reputation for meticulous preparation and an unshakable presence in court. The DA decided to make her the public face of the prosecution, hoping her credibility would counter Ethan's momentum. Ethan first heard of her from Graham, who slid a printed press release across the desk. The photo showed a poised brunette in a tailored navy suit, chin slightly lifted, eyes steady. "She's good," Graham said. "Not the type you can rattle easily." Ethan studied the image for a long moment before smirking. "We'll see about that. Set up the meeting." The media war had done more than just shake the prosecution's confidence. It had forced them to send in new blood. And Ethan was already calculating how to turn her from an adversary into something far more useful. The elevator ride to the 14th floor of the Riverton Justice Center was unusually quiet. Graham stood beside Ethan, thumbing through a folder of neatly tabbed documents. Without looking up, he said, "Remember, she's new to this case, not the enemy. Yet." Ethan echoed, eyes fixed on the illuminated floor numbers. "That's why I'm here, to see if she wants to stay that way." Natalie Pierce's office was spacious but uncluttered, the skyline framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. She rose from behind her desk when they entered, extending a firm handshake, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Callahan, Mr. Foster, thank you for coming." Her tone was cordial, but the thick case file in front of her spoke volumes. Without preamble, she opened it. Let's not waste time. The state is prepared to offer you a plea to voluntary manslaughter. 8 to 10 years, eligible for parole in 6. Ethan leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch. Graham broke it first. Not acceptable. Natalie's gaze shifted between them. It's a fair deal considering the evidence. That's the thing, Ethan said smoothly. You're basing it on evidence that's about to crumble. Cole Whitman is corrupt, and if you keep following his lead, he'll drag you down with him. Her brows arched. She didn't interrupt. Ethan pressed on. You're new here. You don't know the full history, but I do. Cole planted the murder weapon in my house. I can prove it. That's a serious accusation, she replied carefully. It's a serious truth, Ethan countered. Then he smiled, a mix of challenge and invitation. You seem too smart to let your career get tangled in someone else's mess. Graham shifted, clearly sensing Ethan going off script, but said nothing. Ethan leaned forward. Tell you what, if you're curious, I'll explain over dinner. Or, he paused just long enough. How do you feel about live music? I can get us front row seats at the Symphony in Chicago this Saturday. For the first time, Natalie's composure cracked, not much, just the faint narrowing of her eyes as she tried to read his angle. Mr. Callahan, are you trying to charm me into dropping a case? Not at all, Ethan said lightly. I'm inviting you to see that nothing in this case is as it seems. The rest is just pleasant company. Silence lingered. Then Natalie closed the file with deliberate precision. I'll think about what you've said, but the plea expires at the end of the week. Ethan rose, meeting her gaze. Then I guess I'll see you in court, or maybe at the Symphony. Either way, you'll get the truth. As they walked out, Graham muttered under his breath, What exactly was that? A conversation, Ethan said, lips curling into a faint smile, and the start of a crack in their armor. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, a mix of order and history. Sunlight streamed in narrow beams through tall windows, cutting pale strips across the council tables. In the back row, reporters sat wedged shoulder to shoulder, their pens already poised. Ethan sat beside Graham, jacket buttoned, posture composed. When the bailiff called the case, the room fell into a hush so deep that even the scratch of a pen seemed loud. Natalie Pierce opened for the state. Her voice was even deliberate, carrying the jury step by step through projected photographs. The leather couch, the wine glass bleeding into a pale rug, the still bodies of Madison Callahan and Derek Collins. She guided them toward the heart of her theory, the medical examiner's testimony that the time of death was between noon and 3. The defendant's whereabouts during that window, she emphasized, were unclear and undocumented. Motive, means, opportunity. Each word landed like a nail being set. The medical examiner testified first. Precise posture, clear diction. Cause of death, ballistic trauma. Estimated interval, noon to 3, derived from stomach contents, lividity, and ambient temperature. Natalie's questioning was methodical, leaving little room for doubt. When Graham rose for cross, his tone was calm but surgical. He didn't attack the science, he attacked the certainty. Confidence intervals on gastric emptying under stress. Variability in ambient readings with HVAC cycling. Whether any independent time anchors existed beyond physiology. Bit by bit, minutes stretched into half hours, and half hours into something elastic. A juror in the second row began to take more notes. Next came a crime scene technician to authenticate photographs and establish the chain of custody for physical evidence. Natalie's questions were crisp, seals initialed, bags logged, transfers recorded. On cross, Graham traced the chain like a river, probing every bend. Exactly when had the lead detective taken custody? Were there any gaps in the log? Who had access to the evidence locker that afternoon? The answers were competent, but a thin undercurrent of uncertainty hummed beneath them. Graham didn't press hard enough to snap the line. Not yet. He wanted the hum to linger. A financial analyst followed, outlining marital strain through numbers. Boutique charges, hotel folios, unexplained withdrawals. The state framed it as motive. Graham reframed it as lifestyle, large discretionary spending consistent with their income tier. No transaction linked to any murder plan. Numbers, he told the jury, only say what you decide they say. By mid-afternoon, the judge's clock ticked audibly between witnesses. Natalie returned to her theme, the gap in time. The jury had been told there was a hole in Ethan's day. They had not yet been told that hole was an illusion. The final witness was a patrol officer who secured the perimeter. Natalie used him to connect procedure to scene. Tape erected, hallway cleared, log initiated. On cross, Graham found nothing to exploit and didn't pretend otherwise. He simply thanked the officer, a small courtesy jurors remember. When the judge recessed for the day, chairs scraped, voices rose, reporters surged toward the door like fish in a fast current. Ethan stayed seated until the aisle cleared. Graham gathered his binder, face unreadable. "Well," Graham said at last, an even opening, "they've set the table." Ethan's mouth quirked. "Not yet, let them get hungry first." Because the real blow, the perfect alibi on a disc and something far sharper in high-definition pixels hadn't been shown. Day one was not about victory, it was about restraint. Ethan rose, buttoned his jacket, and followed the bailiff's gesture toward the side door, leaving the screen dark, and the jury with questions they didn't yet know how to ask. The second morning of trial began with routine, jurors filing in, the clerk shuffling exhibits. The judge's glasses perched low as she reviewed her notes. Then Natalie Pierce called her next witness, and the air in the room shifted. Detective Cole Whitman walked to the stand in a navy suit that fit like armor, jaw set, oath raised. He gave the jury that same confident half-smile he'd worn since high school, the same one Ethan remembered from locker rooms and long grudges. Natalie guided him through procedure. The search warrant, team assignments, the sweep of Ethan's house. His voice was steady, almost bored, as he described overseeing the recovery of a .380 pistol from the defendant's closet. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't need to. The story sounded clean. Graham rose for cross-examination, a small remote in hand, the faintest hint of a smile on his face. "Detective Whitman, you said you oversaw recovery. Did you personally discover the firearm?" Cole glanced at Natalie, then back. "No, one of my officers located it. I secured it." "Of course," Graham said, nodding as though they were agreeing on the weather. "Let's talk about securing." He pressed a button. The courtroom's overhead screen flickered to life, showing a grainy but steady shot of Ethan's master bedroom. The closet, the dresser, soft morning light pooling through the blinds. The timestamp glowed in the corner. A figure entered. Cole froze. On the video, Cole checked the doorway, then pulled a black pistol from under his jacket. He placed it on the closet shelf, left the room, returned moments later with a green toothbrush and brushed the grip and trigger guard in slow, deliberate strokes. He returned the toothbrush, sifted through a laundry basket, selected a red and white shirt, and pressed the fabric against the pistol. Then he slid the gun into the closet drawer and smoothed the edge of a hanging coat, as if erasing his own fingerprints. A sharp inhale rippled through the jury box. Murmurs broke out in the gallery. The judge lifted a hand. "Order." Graham didn't look away from Cole. "Detective, is that you in the defendant's bedroom?" Cole's throat worked. "On advice of counsel, I invoke the Fifth Amendment." Another juror leaned forward, elbows on knees. Graham clicked again. A second camera angle, bathroom mirror, showed Cole removing the toothbrush from Ethan's travel kit. Ethan's initials visible on the leather case. "Is that you, detective, using the defendant's personal effects on the object you later logged as the murder weapon?" "The fifth." "And here," Graham froze the frame on Cole, pressing the shirt to the gun's grip, "are your hands on the defendant's laundry." "I invoke the fifth." Silence hung heavy. "No further questions," Graham said at last. Natalie stood quickly. "Redirect, Your Honor." "The witness has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege," the judge said evenly. "You may not compel him to answer." Natalie's jaw tightened. She tried to pivot, calling the technician who maintained Ethan's security system. The testimony was technical, precise, and devastating, authenticating the cameras, timestamps, and metadata. No gaps, no tampering. The footage was real. When Cole stepped down, two internal affairs officers were waiting near the back door. The space he left on the witness stand felt like a missing tooth. Graham leaned toward Ethan. "One domino," he murmured, "and the whole row starts to go." Ethan buttoned his jacket, eyes on the jury. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we show them the rest." Day 3 opened with a tension so thick it seemed to cling to the air. The jurors filed in, eyes sharper now, as if expecting another revelation. Natalie Pierce sat straighter than usual, her legal pad already open, pen poised. Graham's briefcase rested at his feet like a closed vault. The prosecution had no choice but to continue their witness list. But before Natalie could call her next, Graham was on his feet. "Your Honor, the defense intends to introduce exculpatory evidence pursuant to discovery, evidence previously withheld for strategic purposes." The judge looked over her glasses. "Proceed." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the defense monitor flickered to life. This time, the footage wasn't from inside Ethan's home. It was from a boutique hotel in downtown Chicago, 3 hours away. Date, the day of the murders. Time, precisely 12:47 p.m. The video showed Ethan stepping through the revolving glass door, a leather garment bag over his shoulder. The lobby was bustling, check-in desks busy, a concierge directing a family toward the elevators. Ethan crossed the marble floor to the front desk, signed the register, and handed over a credit card. The timestamp matched the register entry. The clerk's ID badge was visible, the name clear, Jessica Morales. Cut to an elevator security feed, Ethan entering with two men in tailored suits, one wearing a conference lanyard. Cut again to a wide ballroom shot mid-conference where Ethan sat on a panel table beside a placard reading, Callahan Foundation Civic Partnerships in Urban Renewal. The conference host's microphone introduction placed the start time at exactly 1:00 p.m. Graham paused the video. "Your Honor, the defense calls Ms. Jessica Morales." The young hotel clerk took the stand, testified under oath that she had checked Ethan in personally, remembered his remarks about the lobby Dacre, and had printed his room key herself. Graham walked her through the register entry, the security footage, and her own shift log, all consistent. Natalie's cross-examination was crisp but limited. She tried to imply that Ethan could have left Chicago early that morning, committed the murders, and returned, but the times didn't work. The hotel records placed him on site well before noon, and the distance made her hypothetical impossible. Then Graham delivered the second punch. A digital forensics expert testified that Ethan's cell phone, confirmed by unique IMEI, had been connected to the hotel's secure Wi-Fi from 11:42 a.m. until 3:26 p.m., streaming a live webinar for part of that time. The hotel's network logs were synced with atomic clock time, allowing for no margin of error. The jury leaned forward as the timeline took shape. Murders estimated between noon and 3. Ethan in Chicago from late morning to mid-afternoon. Multiple independent systems confirming his location. Natalie kept her expression neutral, but her pen had stopped moving. When the expert stepped down, Graham looked at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, they told you there was a hole in my client's day. I submit to you there is no hole. There is only the truth." The judge recessed for lunch. The gallery buzzed as reporters typed frantically. In the defense corner, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, the smallest smile at the corner of his mouth. Graham leaned in. "That was the hammer." Ethan shook his head. "No, that was just the foundation. Tomorrow we bring down the whole building." By the fourth morning, the trial no longer felt like a contest of equals. The prosecution's case, once a straight, taut rope, now sagged under the weight of exposed lies and vanishing credibility. The gallery sensed it. So did the jury. Even the court reporter, tapping steadily at her machine, seemed to be listening more closely. Natalie Pierce looked composed, but there was a thinness in her voice when she called her next witness, a forensic analyst meant to cement the DNA link between Ethan and the murder weapon. She walked the jury through lab protocols, chain of custody, and the match probability. 1 in 6, 7 trillion. It was clean, clinical, and to the untrained ear, devastating. Then Graham stood. "MS. Alvarez," he began, voice calm. "You testified that the swab from the firearm's grip matched my client's DNA profile, correct?" "Yes. And the source of that DNA, did you determine how it got there?" "That's not within my purview." "Of course not," Graham said mildly. "But you can tell us the condition of the DNA, fresh, degraded, consistent with touch transfer." Her lips pressed together. The profile was consistent with a single-source touch transfer. Touch transfer, Graham repeated, meaning it could have been placed there indirectly, for example, via a common household item. "Yes," she admitted. Graham tapped the remote. The courtroom monitor lit up, a paused frame from the now infamous footage of Cole Whitman in Ethan's bedroom, toothbrush in hand. "Would you consider a toothbrush to be capable of such a transfer?" A murmur rose from the gallery. "Yes," she said reluctantly. "And when DNA is transferred in that way, does it indicate the person ever touched the firearm directly?" "No." Graham let the word hang in the air. No further questions. Natalie tried to recover on redirect, but the damage was done. The DNA, once a pillar of the state's case, now stood on a cracked foundation. Then came the financial investigator, recalled to address Ethan's alleged motive. Graham dismantled the testimony with surgical precision, reframing transactions as legitimate expenses tied to his foundation's work and travel. A bank officer corroborated the spending patterns. Each answer pulled another thread loose. By mid-afternoon, the jury had stopped leaning toward Natalie's table. Their eyes followed Graham, waiting for the next blow. It came from an unexpected angle. Graham called the internal affairs lieutenant who had taken Cole Whitman into custody. Under oath, the lieutenant confirmed that Cole was under investigation for evidence tampering in multiple cases, not just Ethan's. 3 prior convictions were already under review. The air shifted. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about a police department's integrity. Natalie objected, but the judge allowed the testimony, ruling it went to witness credibility. The lieutenant's words landed like hammers. When court adjourned, Natalie remained at her table longer than usual, eyes fixed on her notes but not reading them. Her pen lay untouched. Outside, the press swarmed. Graham kept his answers measured, almost understated, while Ethan said nothing at all. He didn't need to. The silence was its own message. In the defense war room that night, Graham closed his trial binder with a quiet finality. "Tomorrow," he said, "we end it." Ethan nodded once. No mercy. The trial ended on a Friday afternoon, the jury delivering what the evidence had already made inevitable, a unanimous not guilty on all counts. Ethan stood still as the clerk read the verdict, jaw tight, eyes forward. The weight he had carried for months didn't vanish in a flash. It bled away slowly, replaced by something colder and more deliberate. By Monday morning, Ethan was not in the courtroom. He was in a different kind of war room, the glass-walled conference suite of Harper and Lowell, one of the most aggressive civil litigation firms in the state. Graham sat at the far end of the polished table, flanked by 2 young associates with legal pads already half-filled. "This isn't about recovering losses," Graham said, sliding a folder toward Ethan. "It's about drawing blood and making sure no one in their orbit forgets." Inside the folder was a draft complaint, 37 pages naming the Riverton Police Department, Detective Cole Whitman, and pointedly Natalie Pierce in her official capacity. The causes of action read like an indictment of their own. Malicious prosecution, fabrication of evidence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation. Ethan flipped through, page after page of affidavits, timelines, and exhibits, still frames from the security footage. Bank records annotated in red, sworn statements from the hotel clerk and conference organizer. Every piece of evidence that had saved him in criminal court was now sharpened into a civil weapon. The associates briefed him on damages, economic losses from suspended contracts, reputational harm quantified by canceled speaking engagements, and punitive damages designed to sting. The number at the bottom line was large enough to make even seasoned defendants hesitate. "Serve them all," Ethan said finally, his voice flat. "Same day, and make sure the media has the docket number within the hour." Graham allowed himself the smallest smile. "We'll file in federal court, broader jurisdiction, bigger stage." Within a week, the complaint was public record. Headlines shifted from acquitted local developer to wrongfully accused man sues police for millions. The same reporters who had crowded the criminal courthouse now packed the press conference outside Harper and Lowell's offices. Ethan didn't give them the satisfaction of anger. He spoke quietly, clearly, each word chosen. "Justice isn't just about proving you didn't do it. It's about holding people accountable when they know you didn't and tried to ruin you anyway." The clip ran on every local station and was shared thousands of times online. Civil attorneys not connected to the case called it career suicide for anyone named in the suit. Natalie Pierce's office released a terse statement: "We stand by our process." Cole Whitman, now suspended without pay, declined to comment. For Ethan, the lawsuit wasn't about money. It was about control. For months, he had played defense, reacting to accusations, ducking blows. Now he was the one moving first, dictating the terms, forcing them to respond. In Graham's office later that evening, Ethan studied the framed headlines from past cases on the wall. "How long do you think before one of them offers to settle?" Graham leaned back, folding his arms. "Depends how fast they realize the discovery process will be worse than the trial." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Good. Then we make sure they realize it fast." The knock on Ethan's office door was light, almost polite, not the clipped, impatient rap of someone bringing bad news. When he called, "Come in," the woman who stepped through was nothing like the prosecutors he'd faced in the past. Claire Donovan wore a tailored navy suit that skimmed her frame without looking severe. Her dark hair was swept back in a low twist, her eyes bright but layered, the kind that could smile and measure you at the same time. There was a quiet confidence in the way she crossed the room, not hurried, not tentative, just measured. She introduced herself with a firm handshake. "Natalie Pierce sends her apologies. She's tied up with other matters. I've been asked to represent her office in discussions regarding post-trial legal procedures." Her tone was cordial, her diction precise. At first, their conversation felt like standard post-verdict protocol, acknowledgments of the case's complexity, formalities about returning evidence and timelines for the unsealing of certain records. But as minutes passed, the veneer thinned. Claire's gaze sharpened. "I watched the trial," she said quietly. "All of it, and I don't agree with how our office handled your case." Ethan studied her, the pen in his hand hovering over a legal pad. "That's a rare thing to admit. It's not just about professional disagreement," she continued. "I joined the prosecutor's office to pursue justice, not to shield people who fabricate evidence or bend the law until it breaks." Her words carried no heat, only conviction. Ethan leaned back in his chair, observing her like a puzzle piece that didn't belong in the picture and yet seemed to fit perfectly. "So why are you here, really?" "To make sure what happened to you doesn't get buried under procedural dust," she said, "and to make sure certain people don't walk away untouched." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the HVAC filled the pause, a low, steady undercurrent. Ethan's instincts told him Claire wasn't playing some elaborate bait. There was steel in her, but it wasn't aimed at him. "You're aware," he said at last, "that aligning yourself with me could end your career in that office." "I'm aware," she replied. "But the question is, are you willing to use what you know to end theirs?" Ethan's mouth curved, slow and deliberate. "That depends on how far you're willing to go." Claire didn't flinch all the way. What began as a cautious alliance shifted with unexpected speed. At first, Ethan and Claire met only in Graham's conference room, exchanging information, mapping out how to dismantle the careers of those who had tried to bury him. But strategy meetings turned into working lunches, then into lingering conversations that stretched past the point where either of them was still talking about law. Claire wasn't like anyone Ethan had trusted before. She spoke plainly, never dressing her thoughts in the evasive language he'd come to expect from people in her profession. When she laughed, a low, unforced sound, it felt like something private, offered only to him. One evening, after hours at the office, they stood side by side at a window overlooking the city. Riverton's lights spilled out in a scatter of gold and red. Claire leaned her shoulder lightly against his. "You've been staring at that street for 5 minutes," she said. "I'm thinking about what's left to take from them," Ethan replied. "And I'm thinking," she countered, "about what you get to build after that." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was charged. When she turned toward him, the reflection in the glass showed them standing closer than either had planned. He kissed her, not tentative, but certain. She didn't pull away. From then on, the pace was different. Dinners replaced lunches, phone calls came late at night, and texts slipped between strategic updates like coded messages. Claire's questions became more personal, and Ethan found himself answering without the guarded calculation he used on everyone else. Still, he knew better than to mistake attraction for blind loyalty. Claire had her own mind, her own principles. More than once, she challenged his plans, forced him to explain his endgame in detail. She wasn't afraid of him, and he realized, almost reluctantly, that he respected her for it. One night at his penthouse, they sat on the couch with case files spread between them. She traced her finger along a name on a deposition. "If we go after this one," she said, "we might get leverage on 2 others, but it'll be messy." "Messy I can handle," Ethan said, watching her more than the page. She smiled faintly. "I know." Outside, rain slid in silver lines down the glass. Inside, their plans for retaliation blurred at the edges, replaced by something more complicated and more dangerous. For the first time since his arrest, Ethan was thinking about a future that wasn't just about winning. The first victory didn't come from a courtroom. It arrived in the form of an email, a terse press release from the Riverton Police Department. Effective immediately, Detective Cole Whitman is terminated from his position pending criminal charges for evidence tampering. Ethan read it twice, letting the words settle like a fine pour of whiskey. Across the table, Graham's expression barely shifted. "First domino," he said. News outlets pounced. Evening broadcasts replayed the security footage from Ethan's trial, Cole planting the gun, brushing it with Ethan's belongings, spliced with statements from community leaders demanding an independent review of every case he'd touched. Former defendants came forward, some in tears, others furious, their voices now part of a growing chorus. Within a week, the mayor announced a task force to investigate systemic misconduct within the department. Natalie Pierce's name surfaced in op-eds questioning whether the district attorney's office had turned a blind eye. For Ethan, each headline was a small measure of vindication, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. That next Monday, he and Claire sat side by side in a federal courtroom, this time as plaintiffs. The defense tables, now occupied by city attorneys and insurance counsel, looked crowded, their stacks of paper taller than their confidence. Graham's opening statement was surgical. "This is not just about one man being wrongfully accused. This is about a system that rewarded shortcuts, ignored warnings, and destroyed reputations to preserve its own." The first witness was the hotel clerk, Jessica Morales, her testimony now bolstered by the full trial record. Then came the digital forensics expert, walking the jury through the impossibility of Ethan's alleged timeline. The jurors listened, pens still, eyes forward the same way they had when Graham dismantled the prosecution months earlier. Claire leaned close between witnesses. "They're already on their heels," she whispered. "Good," Ethan murmured. "I want them crawling." Midway through the week, the city's legal team offered a settlement. Graham refused without even glancing at Ethan. They weren't here for quiet payouts. They were here for public accountability. On Friday, a surprise witness took the stand, an internal affairs detective who had reviewed Whitman's other cases. His testimony confirmed a pattern of falsified reports, planted evidence, and coordinated cover-ups. The gallery gasped. A juror shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight. By the end of the day, the defense requested a recess. Rumors swirled that the city council was meeting in emergency session, calculating just how much this case might cost, not just in dollars, but in public trust. Walking out of the courthouse into a wall of microphones, Ethan kept his statement brief. Justice isn't a single event, it's a process. And today, that process is working. The clip aired on every station that night, framed by footage of Cole being led out of the police headquarters in handcuffs. It wasn't the end, but it was the first time Ethan felt the scales tip entirely in his favor. And so, Ethan Callahan walked free not because the system wanted justice, but because he forced it into the light. The lies, the planted evidence, the years of betrayal, all exposed for the world to see. Cole Whitman, the man who once smirked in the interrogation room, now wears handcuffs instead of a badge. Madison's betrayal cost her everything long before the trial ended. And Ethan? He didn't just survive, he rebuilt, stronger than before. But here's the question. If someone tried to destroy you like this, would you seek revenge or walk away? I want to hear your thoughts. Comment below, let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so you never miss the next gripping tale here on Cheating Stories 7. Until next time, stay sharp and remember, betrayal always comes with a price.